Leaving Lola and Blessing felt like cutting off a sick limb. Painful, yes, but necessary. It was the kind of pain that burns at first and then settles into a dull ache, the kind that reminds you that something once attached to you is gone forever. As I walked away from that life, I didn't look back, not because I was brave, but because I was afraid that if I did, I might turn around and accept the familiar suffering again. When Daniel opened his door to me, I truly believed I had stepped into safety. His house was quiet in a way that felt strange, almost suspicious, after the constant noise of Lagos. No shouting neighbors. No generators coughing outside. No music fighting with arguments through thin walls. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring at first, because you're not used to it. There was food in the kitchen without calculation, food I didn't have to divide carefully or stretch across days. Electricity that didn't blink like it was tired of existing, light that stayed on without apology. I told myself this was what peace looked like. Daniel spoke gently, his voice calm and controlled, telling me to rest, to stop worrying, to let him handle things for now. He said it like a promise, like something solid I could lean on. For the first time since I arrived in Lagos, my shoulders dropped. The tightness in my chest loosened. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that pulls you under before you can even finish a thought. But even in that rest, even in that quiet comfort, something inside me refused to relax completely. A small voice, barely louder than a breath, whispered that nothing in Lagos stays kind for long. That peace here is often borrowed, never owned. And as I lay there in the dark, surrounded by comfort I hadn't earned but desperately needed, I wondered how long this kindness would last before it asked for something in return. The first changes were small, almost invisible, the kind you only notice when it is already too late to pretend they never happened. Daniel began asking where I went, who I spoke to, how long I stayed out. At first, the questions came softly, wrapped in calm tones and half smiles. It sounded like concern, like someone trying to protect what mattered to him. I told myself I was lucky. In a city like Lagos, where nobody truly watches out for anyone, having someone who seemed to care felt like a blessing. But care has a way of changing its shape. Slowly, the questions became expectations. He didn't like unanswered calls, even when my phone battery died or network failed. He didn't like surprises, didn't like hearing plans after they had already happened. He wanted to know things before I did them, as if my life needed clearance before movement. When I tried to explain that I was searching for work, that I didn't want to sit idle or depend on him completely, his face tightened in a way that made my words feel foolish. He said Lagos was dangerous. He said the streets were not safe for girls like me. He said I shouldn't stress myself when he was already helping, when he was already carrying the burden. His words sounded reasonable. Protective, even. I nodded. Not because I fully agreed, but because disagreeing felt ungrateful. Something inside me shifted, a quiet discomfort I couldn't yet name. I told myself this was how care looked when someone was serious. But gratitude, I was learning, is a heavy chain when you don't know how to remove it. The more I accepted his help, the harder it became to speak freely. The more he provided, the smaller my voice felt. And even though nothing had happened yet that I could clearly point to as wrong, I began to sense that my freedom was slowly being negotiated away, one question at a time. The first outburst came without warning. Not loud, not dramatic, no shouting that neighbors could hear, no scene that would attract attention. Just anger, sudden and sharp, cutting through the air and freezing me where I stood. One moment we were talking, the next his tone shifted, his face changed, and something unspoken but heavy filled the room. I remember how my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My chest tightened. My hands went cold. My thoughts scattered. Fear settled quietly inside me, familiar, as if it had always been waiting for permission to stay. What stayed with me the most was the silence afterward. A thick, uncomfortable silence that pressed against my ears. No apology at first. No explanation. Just the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the room. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I told myself that if I stayed calm, if I didn't provoke anything further, the moment would pass. And it did. Slowly. Leaving behind a strange emptiness that felt worse than noise. Later that night, Daniel apologized. His voice softened. His eyes looked tired. He said stress had pushed him too far, that work and pressure had been weighing on him. He said he wasn't like that he didn't know what came over him. I listened quietly, my heart still racing, unsure of what to say. The next day, he returned with gifts, money placed carefully on the table, bags of food, things I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Promises followed soon after. It will never happen again. I swear. I'll do better. I wanted to believe him. Belief felt easier than confronting what had happened. Belief felt safer than imagining a future where I would have to start over again. In Lagos, belief often feels like protection. Truth, on the other hand, demands action, and action is expensive. So I held on to his words, even as a quiet part of me wondered why apologies always came with gifts, and why fear had found a place to sit so comfortably inside my chest. I tried to reclaim myself quietly, carefully, the way someone tiptoes around broken glass. I didn't announce my plans. I didn't argue. I simply began to look for work again, telling him only what I felt was necessary, keeping the rest to myself like small, protected secrets. I worked short hours in places that barely paid enough to matter. Shops where the owners promised more tomorrow. Offices where effort was praised but never rewarded. I learned quickly how little Lagos rewards honesty and hard work. Some days, transport alone swallowed everything I earned, leaving me tired, hungry, and wondering why I bothered. Still, I kept going. Work, no matter how small or poorly paid, gave me something Daniel's house could not. It gave me myself. Outside those walls, even while struggling, I could breathe. I could think. I could remember who I was before my life became something that needed explaining. The streets were harsh, yes, but they were honest in their cruelty. They didn't pretend to care while slowly closing in on you. But the later I returned home, the heavier the air became. His questions no longer sounded curious. They arrived sharp, impatient, already carrying judgment. Where were you? Why did it take this long? Who did you see? At first, I explained myself carefully, choosing my words the way people choose fragile items. Then explanations turned into defenses. Defenses turned into arguments. Arguments ended in silence that felt louder than shouting. The house that once felt safe began to feel like a cage with soft walls. Nothing visibly locked me in, yet every movement required permission, every decision demanded justification. Comfort was still there, but it pressed against me now, tight and suffocating. I realized then that safety without freedom is just another form of confinement, and each day I stayed, I felt myself shrinking a little more to fit inside it. Every time things went too far, Daniel compensated. Money appeared on the table like a quiet apology that didn't require words. New clothes hung in the wardrobe, tags still on them, as if fabric could erase memory. His apologies sounded sincere enough to confuse me, soft enough to make me doubt my own feelings. He spoke gently after, promised change, promised patience, promised understanding. And for a moment, things would calm down. He wasn't my boyfriend, yet he behaved like he owned my time, my movements, my silence. I found myself measuring my steps before taking them, choosing my words carefully, even controlling my breathing when the room felt tense. Lagos didn't need to chase me anymore. I was trapped in stillness, frozen by routine and fear. I told myself this was temporary, that I was only enduring until I saved enough to leave. I didn't realize then how hard it is to walk away when fear feeds you just enough comfort to make staying feel possible. The job I finally secured kept me outside most days. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay nearly enough to matter in Lagos terms. Some days, after transport and food, there was barely anything left to show for the effort. But it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: space. Space to think. Space to exist outside those walls. I met people struggling like me, people counting days instead of plans, surviving one shift at a time. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. I often came home exhausted, feet aching, clothes smelling of the city, but sometimes I carried a quiet sense of hope with me. Daniel didn't like that. He asked why I needed the job when he could handle things, when I didn't have to stress myself. I struggled to explain that independence isn't about money alone. It's about choosing where you go, when you return, and how you breathe without asking for permission. Lola and Blessing resurfaced again, like reminders of a life I had tried so hard to escape. Seeing them felt like reopening an old wound that had barely begun to heal. They looked broken in different ways, thinner, quieter, their confidence chipped away. Legos had chewed them and spit them out without apology. They spoke of hunger that came suddenly, of betrayal by people they trusted, of doors that once opened easily but now stayed firmly shut. As they talked, they kept glancing at me, at my clothes, at my phone, at the place I stayed, with a kind of expectation that made my chest tighten. To them, Daniel's presence meant I had made it, that I had found a way out they could still reach through me. Guilt wrapped itself around me slowly, heavy and suffocating. Everyone wanted something from me now, money, help, answers I didn't have. And the truth was, I was barely holding myself together, trying to survive my own battles while carrying the weight of theirs. Leaving Daniel became a thought that visited me often, slipping into my mind at unexpected moments. It would appear when I was washing dishes, when I was lying awake at night, when I stood by the window watching the city move without me. Each time the thought came, fear answered it immediately, sharp and convincing. Where would you go? How would you survive? Legos doesn't forgive people who start over too many times. Legos keeps count. Legos remembers. I had already started over more times than I could explain to anyone. From the village to the city. From Lola and Blessing to Daniel. From one version of hope to another. The idea of starting again felt like tempting fate, like daring the city to finally finish what it had been threatening all along. So I stayed. I endured. I adjusted my expectations and told myself endurance was strength. One night, after another tense confrontation that left the room heavy and my chest tight, Daniel apologized again. His words followed the familiar pattern: soft voice, tired eyes, explanations that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. He spoke about stress, about pressure, about how much he was doing for me. I listened, nodding automatically, already knowing what would come next. The apology. The calm. The temporary peace. But something inside me didn't react the way it usually did. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't even feel sad. Instead, a quiet emptiness spread through me, slow and unsettling. It was the absence of resistance, the moment when your body stops fighting because it is exhausted. I realized then that I was disappearing, not suddenly, but gradually, piece by piece. My opinions softened. My dreams shrank. My voice adjusted itself to avoid conflict. I was still there physically, but emotionally, I was fading. And that realization terrified me more than hunger ever had. More than sleeping on floors. More than starting again with nothing. Because I understood then that if I stayed much longer. Before sunrise, while the city was still quiet and the streets lay wrapped in darkness, Amina slipped out of the house. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, as if it might give her away. She did not take anything with her: no bag, no money, only the clothes she was wearing and the fear pushing her forward. Each step felt heavy, but she kept moving, afraid that if she stopped, she would lose the courage to continue. The early morning air was cold against her skin, and the unfamiliar streets stretched endlessly before her. Amina ran without knowing exactly where she was going. Her legs ached, her breath came in painful gasps, and tears blurred her vision, but she refused to turn back. She passed closed shops, silent houses, and empty roads, feeling small and lost in a city that had never been kind to her. By the time the sky began to lighten, her strength was gone. Her body could no longer carry her, and she collapsed by the roadside, exhausted, hungry, and shaking with fear. It was there that a bread seller noticed her. The woman saw the tears, the trembling hands, and the desperation written clearly on Amina's face. Gently, she asked what was wrong. At first, Amina could barely speak, but soon the words poured out, the promises, the lies, the beatings, and the loneliness. The woman listened without interrupting, her face filling with concern and anger. Instead of turning away, she offered Amina water, comfort, and help. In that moment, after so much cruelty, Amina encountered kindness again, and it reminded her that she was not completely alone. At the bus stop, watching Lagos move like it always does, I finally understood the lesson the city had been teaching me from the very beginning. People hurried past without looking twice. Danfo buses screeched to a halt and sped off again. Hawkers shouted prices with voices already tired from the day ahead. Lagos didn't pause for my pain, and it didn't celebrate my escape. It never does. Lagos doesn't clap for survival. It doesn't reward courage immediately, and it doesn't slow down just because someone has chosen themselves. But standing there, bag at my feet, heart still racing, I realized that Lagos reveals people more than it rewards them. It strips you slowly, quietly, until you see exactly who you are willing to become in order to stay. I didn't know what part 3 of my life would look like. I didn't have a clear plan or a promise of ease waiting ahead. All I had was the understanding that comfort which costs your freedom is far too expensive to keep paying for. As the bus arrived and I stepped forward, fear still sat somewhere in my chest, but it no longer controlled my legs. Even if Lagos breaks you, I understood now, it cannot own you unless you allow it. And for the first time since I arrived in this city chasing a dream wrapped in a Benz, I knew that whatever came next would be on my own terms.
Thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching this video from to know how far the video has traveled.